All right, hello and welcome back to the Global Mindfulness and Education Summit. I'm one of your two hosts, Dr. Chris Willard, and I'm so excited today to be talking to Valerie Brown, who's a wonderful mindfulness educator and also does a lot of work with mindfulness as it relates to travel. And so I'm very curious to hear a lot more about the work that she's doing in all of these different spheres. But just wanted to say welcome to you, Valerie, and could you just introduce yourself for our viewers around the world?
Hi, everybody. It's a delight to be here. My name is Valerie Brown, and I'm just excited to be part of this gathering. Yeah.
Thank you so much. And can you tell us a little bit about the work that you do and the different kinds of work that you do, and share a bit about your books? I know you've done a lot of writing as well.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. Yeah, so the work always comes with a story, right? There's a story to everything. So when I passed the New Jersey bar exam to be a lawyer many years ago, I had no intention whatsoever of being a Dharma teacher or a mindfulness practitioner or anything like that. My intentions were pretty crass, and I'm not proud of it, but it is what it was. My intentions were to make money and to get out of Brooklyn.
Mm-hmm.
And Brooklyn wasn't the kind of swanky, fancy place it is today. You know, it was a place that people wanted to leave quite quickly. So I did a lot of running. I ran from Brooklyn to undergraduate school and graduate school and law school, and the big and important job as a lobbyist and a lawyer. The problem with that job was that it was really killing my spirit. It was killing my soul, physically taxing on so many levels, emotionally draining. And so, like many people, when being under stress, I decided I'd take myself on a vacation, right? So I went to one of my favorite places in the United States, to New Mexico, and I climbed to the top of a very big hill, took off my backpack, and I was just kind of chilling and looking up at the sky. And I really believe, for the very first time, I truly noticed that, number one, that there were clouds in the sky and that they actually move like really slowly. And you might say, well, that's kind of what clouds do. But for me, in my life, I was so busy, I was so driven, really type A, about getting results, achievement, getting skills under my belt, that I had dismissed the natural world. I was alienated from the natural world. And obviously I was alienated from myself. Well, that moment was a radical wake-up call for me. And it got me thinking about who and what I had become. And so I then started traveling and looking for sources of trying to re-become a human being, to come back to my senses, to be a whole person, not just this machine that works all the time. And so that took me on a very long journey. So I don't know if that answers your question. But.
Absolutely. And what were some of the places that you think you started to look, and what did you start to find on your spiritual journey after this waking up? And it's amazing. I'm always curious about people's origin stories, and it's amazing to me how often suffering plays a role, and which of course it does, right, in spiritual growth and spiritual discovery, and then often something about nature too is what starts to help people wake up and reconnect.
Yes, so true. When you say the word origin, what immediately comes to my mind is identity. My identity, and identity matters. And I think this is a huge part of the mindfulness movement that is kind of underdeveloped on one level. So my identity from a historical dimension, the historical dimension of identity, is that I'm of Afro-Cuban descent. My mother's Cuban, my father's Jamaican, and both immigrated into the United States with very little. I know many, many, many other people share this story. And so for me, part of the drivenness was a sense of trying to make good for them. My parents had very little education. My mother was a maid. My father a tailor in the Bowery in Lower Manhattan. Wow. And so I grew up with poverty and violence in New York City, and this was a huge part of my identity that drove me to so-called success. And so I think that is a part of the origin story, as well as my ancestors, my grandparents, who also came from poverty. So this was really an important part of my becoming.
Yeah, absolutely. And what role did that play as you started to discover seeking out or stumbling into the Dharma world, or the quote unquote mindfulness world, however we might want to describe it, in the work that you're doing now?
Yeah, so after that epiphany moment on the top of that mountain, literally at this mountaintop experience, I realized that I was a seeker, that there was something about me that is and was a wanderer, a seeker. And by that I mean deeply curious. And that's my nature. And I think I inherited that from my ancestors, my parents. There has to be that kind of seeking within a person to immigrate from their homeland to another place. So I inherited that sense of that urgency. Yeah. And that led me to begin to travel all over the world. I would take solo pilgrimages everywhere. And so I would read about a place, whether it was India or Africa or South America, Europe. I would get the Lonely Planet guidebook and pack my backpack and arrive there and figure it out. Yeah. And so this process of wandering with openness and great vulnerability, I have to say, and curiosity, had the effect of kind of chipping away of the sense of this ego sense that I was also building of trying to become somebody. And so it was both stabilizing and destabilizing at the same time to be in a country where I did not know the language, where I hardly knew where I was going, and making my way as a wanderer, a pilgrim. Yeah. Now, I want to say also that as an American, I had resources, but also as a Black person, I came with that as well. So there was a lot of complexity in that nature of traveling.
I would imagine. I would really imagine. And I spent a lot of my younger days, summers of graduate school, subletting my apartment and buying a plane ticket again, South America, Asia, India, backpacking around for 2 months, sometimes with friends, sometimes just on my own, sometimes with my girlfriend. And it's a really, I think of it sometimes as, it's a little bit like a retreat, right? You're on your own, you're in the moment. It's just, there's a reduction in complexity of, where am I going to eat next? Where am I going to sleep? And how am I going to be safe? And then, and then it's also interesting just doing that as an American with privilege, but then also, as you said, as an African-American woman, that's not something that's seen in a lot of parts of the world. And a lot of assumptions were made about me as an American. And I imagine so many more assumptions being made about you in very complex ways as an African-American woman traveling by yourself, and
Yes.
I'm sure you've got some
Oh, yes.
fascinating and some painful stories about that too. But yeah,
Oh, yes.
yeah,
Yeah. So as a way of consolidating, integrating, and processing all of this, one of the things that I did was I went back to that same place in New Mexico and spent some time writing a book about these various travels that I had taken, to the gorgeous island of Iona in the Hebrides, and to the Japanese pilgrimage of 88 temples of Shikoku, and traveling throughout the north and south of India, and these places. But yes, there is a known element and there is an unknown element, and particularly in pilgrimage,
yeah,
and it really does trace the hero's journey that the mythologist Joseph Campbell talks about, but also the cultural anthropologist Angelis Arian talks a lot about the movement of peoples in the world, and this journey that we're on of a longing that turns to a calling, that turns to a desire to break through the status quo, that turns to a action that sets us on a path or on the way. And then we stumble. We have challenges and trials that we have to meet, but we're not alone. So we meet mentors, we meet guides, we meet friends along the path.
yeah,
And through that, we come to a place of greater understanding, greater wisdom, integration. And then with all of that, we come back out into the world and share what we've learned from this journey.
yeah. What do you feel like were some of the lessons learned, some of the more profound experiences that you had in some of those travels and some of those pilgrimages that you were taking?
Yeah.
What were you seeking and what did you find? I guess would be another way of asking.
Well, some of the insights that I've had, the lessons of the road, the way, the path, are both, is paradoxical. It's both obvious and then not obvious. So one of the obvious, not obvious lessons that I've learned is the power of human presence. That there are countless times I'm in a country where I don't speak the language. I don't speak Malayalam, right? But people can perceive kindness. They can perceive attention. They can perceive compassion. That's something they can perceive without words. And we know that nonverbal expression is significantly more than any verbal expression a person can make. And what I find is that, we as a kind of human society in a virtual world, we discount, we underestimate, grossly underestimate the power of human presence.
Yeah, yeah.
And just how powerful that is. And I think one of the greatest gifts we have to give and receive from other people is our human presence. And so what is mindfulness? My opinion, like my little 2 cents, is it's training in how to become human, how to re-become, how to remember how to be human, how to walk, how to talk, how to eat, how to sit, how to breathe. That's what mindfulness is. And so I, very early on, when, in my 30s, I got so lucky because I went to a public lecture given by Zen Master Thich Nhat Hanh. This was 1995. And I was still in, I was very much in my lawyer job, very aggressive, very angry, actually rageful.
Yeah.
And so I showed up at this talk with a lot of this anger in me. And I walked out of the talk and I thought, that guy's nuts. Like, what is he talking about? Peace and love. Yeah, sure.
Right.
But it was like a key that opened a door, lock to a door, and I started going with our beloved teacher Ty all over the world. Wow. And with the Sangha and all of the retreats, everywhere Ty went, I went. And so I had all these years to be with not only Ty, but with the community to practice how to become a human being.
Wow.
And I'm so grateful for the community.
Yeah.
Grateful for our teacher. Yeah.
And he so much emphasizes Sangha community, and it's been wonderful this process of interviewing people, because my story really comes out of the Thich Nhat Hanh tradition. I think it was 1998 or 1999, so not long after you. And almost every conversation, his presence has seeped in, or his influence. It's been just beautiful to be able to really, really see that and hear about that. So you had this powerful fancy lawyer job. And so did you leave that job to go join the Sangha and travel with Thich Nhat Hanh and doing retreats and that kind of thing? Or tell me about
So what happened was I was a closet meditator. I would go to my day job, but at night and after work, on weekends, I would practice with the community.
Yeah.
And I did that for many, many years until I realized that my work was really interfering with my spiritual life.
Yeah.
And that actually it was deeper than that. I was no longer a lawyer. Everything that I had built up, all of the so-called security of my pension and my medical care and all of these things and money I had saved and everything, I was so scared, how am I going to survive if I'm no longer a lawyer? I gave everything up for this. And so when I realized I was no longer a lawyer, I had to figure out, who am I really? Yeah. And it's kind of curious, Chris, people would say to me all the time when I was this closet meditator, they would say, you don't seem like a lawyer to me. And I would say to myself, what the heck's the matter with that person?
Right.
Because I didn't see what they saw.
Yeah. Yeah.
So at some point, I had to make a decision about who I had become. And that was about 6 years ago that I let go of my job, all the security that involved, maybe longer than 6 years. And now, I don't have any of that so-called security of the pension or anything like that. My work has, it's like a flower that has blossomed.
Yeah.
I could never have imagined that this would be my life. So my life now is leading retreats all over the United States and other places. Now, taking people on pilgrimage and teaching them how to be a pilgrim, and then having traveling together to walk El Camino de Santiago, and a pilgrimage we call Walk in Beauty, and teaching. You know, last year the community decided that I should be a Dharma teacher, a great honor, and so now my work and my life is writing and teaching and leading retreats and leading pilgrimage. And I also just last year, Georgetown University came to me and asked if I would be one of the co-directors for their Institute for Transformational Leadership, the leadership coaching program.
Yeah.
And I studied with Georgetown in their coaching certificate program, because I knew I needed something else to replace the income. And so I do now, I work with individuals and teams to transform their lives.
Yeah.
That's what I do.
Yeah. And it's so funny, kind of giving up security on one hand, but embracing and being embraced by the Sangha on the other hand. It's just, you know, really it's trading one form of security for another in a sense, right? Yeah. Yeah.
Yes.
And can you share a bit about your work in education in particular?
Yes.
A lot of our viewers are interested in education.
Yes. Yeah. So as a lobbyist and a lawyer, I represented educational institutions. I represented K through 12 schools, college presidents and boards, you know, so quite like powerful kinds of people. And you know, so understanding administrations and boards and strategy and influence. This was the work that I did in K through 12 and in higher education. And so I feel that I have a kind of understanding of that world. And it's really quite interesting. In that world, we ask many important questions. The why of education, the how of education, the when of education. We seldom ask who of education. Who are these children? Who are the faculty? And with sincere and depth and genuine interest. And mindfulness helps to unlock the who of who is the person, who is the human being engaged in this endeavor. And this is a very, very important question to ask. There's a line in Happy Teachers Will Change the World, a book written by Thich Nhat Hanh that came out maybe a couple of years ago. And I love the line. He says something like, you know, our mission in education is not to transmit knowledge, but to create, to help shape human beings who will create a beautiful, a more loving and more compassionate and just world. And this is, to me, the task of mindfulness in education, to deeply answer the question of who are we? Not that the other questions aren't important, they are.
Right, absolutely. So, and yeah. I'm also just kind of like awestruck with just how much wisdom keeps flowing through Ty and through his students and through the larger Sangha, of course, as well. So are you often leading retreats specifically for educators and still doing advocacy in the education sphere?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I feel very full circle. I no longer, I'm still a lawyer. I still have my bar admission, but I'm not a lobbyist anymore. But I do understand influence and advocacy and power. And so I really enjoy working with social activists who are trying to, you know, to really engage influence and power, because I feel I have a sense and an understanding of how to do that, but how to do that without burnout, and how to do that in a way that truly influences other people. That feel I have deep understanding about. And that understanding comes from a long time of experience and a lot of experimentation that I feel I have a contribution to make. So I also feel I came full circle because the clients that I had represented, the last client I represented was a large group of lawyers, mental health professionals, and financial wealth managers, kind of people who got together in a consortium. And they wanted to have the laws changed. And so I worked with them to get a statute passed. And it took about 2 years, but the statute was passed unanimously. And it allowed for collaborative divorce, where people could divorce in a way that was, where there was more understanding and more compassion. And after the passage of the bill, that same group came back to me months later to ask me to lead them in a session on how to listen, how to be in relationship with other people. And so my heart was so touched. I felt, now I've arrived.
Yeah.
This is really, they saw what I did, not just the mechanics of how to get a bill through the legislature, but that I was able to transmit the teachings of the Plum Village tradition and Thich Nhat Hanh in my work in a way that was meaningful. That meant something to me.
And I think so many professions, professional professions are people think, whether it's teaching, whether it's being a lawyer, whether it's being a teacher, so many jobs, people think it's about speaking, but teaching people how to listen, especially teaching educators how to listen, I think is, I think about grad school, and I was a teacher for a couple of years, and it was like just learning how to teach and how to speak, right? But it's like they're not teaching us how to listen, and that is so important in the work of an educator, to know how to listen. So beautiful.
Well, I'm also a Quaker, a member of the Religious Society of Friends, and I've been a Quaker for about 20 years. Listening is a very important practice among Friends. And again, this is a hugely underrated practice, hugely underrated. We often say that listening is so close to being loved that most people cannot tell the difference. And so to listen another person so that they can hear themselves in an authentic and genuine way, that's a great, great gift to oneself and to others.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
And actually, as a lobbyist, it is not possible to be a lobbyist unless the person knows how to listen. Cannot be done.
Yeah,
cannot.
Yeah. Well, thank you. This is really powerful. The other question I had for you, because I know you've done a lot of writing, do you feel like there's a relationship between mindfulness and writing, and the creating that goes along with that? Even in writing nonfiction, it's still a creative process that I think many people don't appreciate. But as someone who's a writer, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I'm working on several projects right now, and when I think about writing, and it's really about being present. Can't write much if you're completely distracted. Right. So it's also a discipline, right?
Yeah.
And it's easier than it sounds, but to really focus. And so to write is to develop these skills of focused attention, discipline, and also inquiry. Yeah, mindful inquiry, to really ask oneself, what is the meaning here?
Yeah.
What are the details? When we're mindful, we're aware of the details as well as the big picture. And so when we write, it's about remembering those details. So one thing you haven't asked me about and is sort of where kind of the frontier edge of mindfulness and some global issues that I see that I think are really important to share with the audience.
Yeah.
And certainly here in the United States, and I know elsewhere, having, you know, the great honor of being with the Plum Village community, that the role of Black, Indigenous, and people of color in the mindfulness world is critical. To the extent that those voices are missing, our Sangha, our global Sangha, is less informed, less robust, and less mindful. And so it's critical to do everything that we can to be a more diverse, equitable, and inclusive global community.
Absolutely, absolutely. Do you have some words of wisdom on how the mindfulness movement, or some thoughts on how the mindfulness movement or mindfulness and education movement can do a better job? Do you have thoughts about that? I'm sure you've got many. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm writing about that right, you know, now. So one of the things that I think is really important goes back to what we talked about earlier, which is identity matters. I think it's really important that we each begin to examine not only our historical identity, but obviously from the Buddhist perspective, there's not only the historical dimension of identity, there's the ultimate dimension of identity where there's no birth, no death, no coming, no going, no after, and no before, right? That we examine our historical identity. How have our perceptions been shaped? What can we do to shed light, to wake up on these perceptions that have hardened into, you know, the way we think and maybe even our character? And, you know, we know that perceptions are formed by many, many, many factors. And so it's incumbent on each one of us to really begin to examine our own identity and to be able to understand that and the role that that has played in shaping our thinking and our acting.
Absolutely. And I do think just as, you know, I think, and you, I'm sure you've seen this in your travels too, but, you know, the United States is a diverse and plural society, or we strive to be, or many of us strive to be. But I think often one of the things I discovered traveling was seeing how diverse the world is, and how we, you know, sometimes think of this country is all full of this kind of people, when in fact that's not true. There are so many struggling indigenous groups and different ethnic groups and different linguistic groups and spiritual traditions and people, you know, after colonialism, that have been, you know, whole populations and groups of people that have been rearranged in all these ways because of colonialism, and how that's happening just everywhere in the world. It's not just in the US, and how to bring more inclusivity to mindfulness in all of these ways. It's interesting teaching mindfulness around the world, because often what happens is I end up with just a sliver of the elite, and not actually a very diverse population of people I'm working with wherever it is I go, which is kind of fascinating, because these countries and these different places are much more diverse than I think people often recognize. And yet mindfulness ends up only reaching a sliver of people many, many places in the world. And that's unfortunate. You know, it's not just in the US that it's rendered inaccessible, or there are many visible and invisible barriers to accessing these practices and traditions, but this is true so many places. And so I think to have a more global conversation, as I think you're innovating that conversation, I think is so important. So I certainly really appreciate the work that you're doing, not just here, but beginning that conversation other places as well. It's just so critical.
Well, I really appreciate that, Chris. And what immediately comes to my mind is cultural humility, right? And to understand the roots of the mindfulness practice,
Right.
What are the roots of this?
Right.
And so, there's a lot of discussion around misappropriation,
Mm-hmm.
of cultural misappropriation, of mindfulness and mindfulness practices. And this is a very, very big topic. And I think wherever we are, whether it's the practice of mindfulness in Vietnam, China, South America, that we need to express a cultural humility for how these practices are used in the context of the people there and
Right.
the culture.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. It's not just translating words. It's not, and I think also it's not just taking concepts and pretending they just appeared 30 years ago. And yet it's so complex. I was talking about this with Bo, who you may know, also out of the Thich Nhat Hanh tradition, and kind of, especially as it relates to education, how to make this accessible to people, and yet also not be erasing where the origins of this stuff, right? Which is often coming from, colonized places that have had other resources stolen from them. People coming here who have, in many ways been traumatized, and bringing these practices. So it's very complex and very hard. And I think just a willingness to engage with these questions and aim for answers, even though knowing that answers are always moving also. But it's so hard. It's so hard. Yeah. Yeah. Anything else that you'd like to share, or perhaps a practice that you find powerful that you might want to share with our audience?
Yes. I'd actually like to take us back to the practice that I stumbled on that began the kind of wake-up call, which is the practice of watching clouds.
Mm.
Now, again, you might think, yeah, well, what's the difference? But there's actually a lot of research, that, and I'm sure you're aware of, that talks about the power of nature, the power of awe and wonder, right? In not only the physiologically what happens to people when we are in the presence of something vast like the sky, but also what happens, spiritually and emotionally. Yeah, so the practice I'd like to share is looking at clouds, and it's very simple. We can all do that. And so it begins with taking just a couple of deep breaths and arriving, noticing that you're here. If you're standing or seated, maybe feeling your feet on the ground. And then taking a moment to connect with your body and with your eyes. And maybe expressing a sense of gratitude that we have eyes and sight in good enough working order. And with that sense of how lucky we are to be able to see, looking up and breathing and taking in the sky, the vastness of the sky, the colors, maybe feeling a gentle breeze on your skin, noticing how the clouds move, noticing what may be present in the sky, being aware of whatever sensation or thoughts are arising. And then taking in a breath and breathing out a breath. And again, coming to a sense of gratitude for this moment. Allowing yourself to feel how lucky you are for this moment. And when you're ready, again, another breath in and a breath out. And so that is the practice of a practice I do every day, all day, of clouds move.
Thank you. I don't, again, we don't know each other, but this is actually how I often open my talks, is sharing that my first experience of mindfulness before I heard the word was just being with my dad. And he said to me, pick a cloud and you focus on it. You can just breathe with that cloud and watch it start to move and watch it start to change. And when I try to reconnect with what early experience of mindfulness, even before hearing that word, like that's what it is for me. So this is very moving, and it's a beautiful day where I am. The garbage trucks are now gone, which you can probably hear in the background, which have their own lessons, of course. But thank you. That was very powerful and just resonated so much with my own early experiences of mindfulness. So thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you for the work that you've done and will continue to do, and for gathering this wonderful community. I'm delighted to be a part of it.
Well, thank you so much for participating and sharing your experience and your wisdom. And if people want to get in touch, how can folks learn more about some of the retreats that you're doing, the pilgrimages, or your books? Where can people go to learn more?
Yes, so my website is LEAD, L-E-A-D, smartcoaching.com. LEADsmartcoaching.com.
Wonderful. Great. Lead Smart Coaching. Great. Thank you. And it sounds like wonderful work you're continuing to do, and watching your evolution through all of this, and this new writing project also. And just larger project, I think, is so important. These questions of identity and inclusion and equity are just, they're important just on so many levels. So thank you for that work that you're doing as well for everybody.
Yeah, thank you.
We'll be in touch. Thank you. Have a wonderful journey. I know you're about to go on a pilgrimage, so enjoy that. And I hope we'll cross in person again at some point.
Yes, the other side of El Camino de Santiago. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.